With the absence of Ursula, with the invisible presence of Melchiades, who continued his stealthy shuffling through the rooms, the house seemed enormous and empty. Rebecca took charge of domestic order, while the Indian woman took care of the bakery. At dusk, when Pietro Crespi would arrive, preceded by a cool breath of lavender, and always bringing a toy as a gift, his fiancée would receive the visitor in the main parlour, with doors and windows open to be safe from any suspicion. It was an unnecessary precaution, for the Italian had shown himself to be so respectful that he didn't even touch the hand of the woman who was going to be his wife within the year. Those visits were filling the house with remarkable toys. Mechanical ballerinas, music boxes, acrobatic monkeys, trotting horses, clowns who played the tambourine, the rich and startling mechanical fauna that Pietro Crespi brought dissipated José Arcadio Buendia's affliction over the death of Melchiades, and carried him back to his old days as an alchemist. He lived at that time in a paradise of disemboweled animals, of mechanisms that had been taken apart in an attempt to perfect them with a system of perpetual motion based upon the principles of the pendulum. Aureliano, for his part, had neglected the workshop in order to teach little Remedios to read and write. At first, the child preferred her dolls to the man who would come every afternoon, and who was responsible for her being separated from her toys in order to be bathed and dressed and seated in the parlour to receive the visitor. But Aureliano's patience and devotion finally won her over, up to the point where she would spend many hours with him, studying the meaning of the letters and sketching in a notebook with coloured pencils little houses with cows in the corral, and round suns with yellow rays that hid behind the hills. Only Rebecca was unhappy, because of Amaranta's threat. She knew her sister's character, the haughtiness of her spirit, and she was frightened by the virulence of her anger. She would spend whole hours sucking her finger in the bathroom, holding herself back with an exhausting iron will so as not to eat earth. In search of some relief for her uncertainty, she called Pilar Ternera to read her future. After a string of conventional vagaries, Pilar Ternera predicted, "You will not be happy as long as your parents remain unburied." Rebecca shuddered. As in the memory of a dream, she saw herself entering the house as a very small girl, with the trunk and the little rocker, and a bag whose contents she had never known. She remembered a bald gentleman dressed in linen and with his collar closed by a gold button, who had nothing to do with the King of Hearts. She remembered a very young and beautiful woman with warm and perfumed hands, who had nothing in common with the Jack of Diamonds and his rheumatic hands, and who used to put flowers in her hair and take her out walking in the afternoon through a town with green streets. "I don't understand," she said. Pilar Ternera seemed disconcerted. "I don't either, but that's what the cards say." Rebecca was so preoccupied with the enigma that she told it to José Arcadio Buendia, and he scolded her for believing in the predictions of the cards, but he undertook the silent task of searching closets and trunks, moving furniture and turning over beds and floorboards, looking for the bag of bones. He remembered that he had not seen it since the time of the rebuilding. He secretly summoned the masons, and one of them revealed that he had walled up the bag in some bedroom because it bothered him in his work. After several days of listening, with their ears against the walls, they perceived the deep clock. They penetrated the wall, and there were the bones in the intact bag. They buried it the same day in a grave without a stone, next to that of Melchiades, and José Arcadio Buendia returned home free of a burden that for a moment had weighed on his conscience as much as the memory of Prudencio Aguilar. When he went through the kitchen, he kissed Rebecca on the forehead. "Get those bad thoughts out of your head," he told her. "You're going to be happy." The friendship with Rebecca opened up to Pilar Ternera the doors of the house, closed by Ursula since the birth of Arcadio. She would arrive at any hour of the day, like a flock of goats, and would unleash her feverish energy in the hardest tasks. Sometimes she would go into the workshop and help Arcadio sensitize the daguerreotype plates with an efficiency and a tenderness that ended up by confusing him. That woman bothered him. The tan of her skin, her smell of smoke, the disorder of her laughter in the dark room distracted his attention and made him bump into things. On a certain occasion, Aureliano was there working on his silver, and Pilar Ternera leaned over the table to admire his laborious patience. Suddenly it happened. Aureliano made sure that Arcadio was in the darkroom before raising his eyes and meeting those of Pilar Ternera, whose thought was perfectly visible, as if exposed to the light of noon. "Well," Aureliano said, "tell me what it is." Pilar Ternera bit her lips with a sad smile. "That you'd be good in a war," she said. "Where you put your eye, you put your bullet." Aureliano relaxed with the proof of the omen. He went back to concentrate on his work as if nothing had happened, and his voice took on a restful strength. "I will recognize him," he said. "He'll bear my name." José Arcadio Buendia finally got what he was looking for. He connected the mechanism of the clock to a mechanical ballerina, and the toy danced uninterruptedly to the rhythm of her own music for 3 days. That discovery excited him much more than any of his other harebrained undertakings. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. Only the vigilance and care of Rebecca kept him from being dragged off by his imagination into a state of perpetual delirium from which he would never recover. He would spend the nights walking around the room thinking aloud, searching for a way to apply the principles of the pendulum to ox carts, to harrows, to everything that was useful when put into motion. The fever of insomnia fatigued him so much that one dawn he could not recognize the old man with white hair and uncertain gestures who came into his bedroom. It was Prudencio Aguilar. When he finally identified him, startled that the dead also aged, José Arcadio Buendia felt himself shaken by nostalgia. "Prudencio," he exclaimed, "you've come from a long way off." After many years of death, the yearning for the living was so intense, the need for company so pressing, so terrifying the nearness of that other death which exists within death, that Prudencio Aguilar had ended up loving his worst enemy. He had spent a great deal of time looking for him. He asked the dead from Riohacha about him, the dead who came from the Upar Valley, those who came from the swamp, and no one could tell him because Macondo was a town that was unknown to the dead until Melquiades arrived and marked it with a small black dot on the motley maps of death. José Arcadio Buendia conversed with Prudencio Aguilar until dawn. A few hours later, worn out by the vigil, he went into Aureliano's workshop and asked him, "What day is today?" Aureliano told him that it was Tuesday. "I was thinking the same thing," José Arcadio Buendia said, "but suddenly I realized that it's still Monday, like yesterday. Look at the sky. Look at the walls. Look at the begonias. Today is Monday too." Used to his manias, Aureliano paid no attention to him. On the next day, Wednesday, José Arcadio Buendia went back to the workshop. "Oh, this is a disaster," he said. "Look at the air. Listen to the buzzing of the sun, the same as yesterday and the day before. Today is Monday, too." That night, Pietro Crespi found him on the porch, weeping for Prudencio Aguilar, for Melquiades, for Rebecca's parents, for his mother and father, for all of those he could remember, and who were now alone in death. He gave him a mechanical bear that walked on its hind legs on a tightrope, but he could not distract him from his obsession. He asked him what had happened to the project he had explained to him a few days before about the possibility of building a pendulum machine that would help men to fly. And he answered that it was impossible, because a pendulum could lift anything into the air, but it could not lift itself. On Thursday, he appeared in the workshop again with the painful look of ploughed ground. "The time machine has broken," he almost sobbed, "and Ursula and Amaranta so far away." Aureliano scolded him like a child, and he adopted a contrite air. He spent 6 hours examining things, trying to find a difference from their appearance on the previous day, in the hope of discovering in them some change that would reveal the passage of time. He spent the whole night in bed with his eyes open, calling to Prudencio Aguilar, to Melquiades, to all the dead, so that they would share his distress. But no one came. On Friday, before anyone arose, he watched the appearance of nature again until he did not have the slightest doubt but that it was Monday. Then he grabbed the bar from a door, and with the savage violence of his uncommon strength, he smashed to dust the equipment in the alchemy laboratory, the daguerreotype room, the silver workshop, shouting like a man possessed in some high-sounding and fluent but completely incomprehensible language. He was about to finish off the rest of the house when Aureliano asked the neighbours for help. 10 men were needed to get him down, 14 to tie him up, 20 to drag him to the chestnut tree in the courtyard, where they left him tied up, barking in the strange language and giving off a green froth at the mouth. When Ursula and Amaranta returned, he was still tied to the trunk of the chestnut tree by his hands and feet, soaked with rain and in a state of total innocence. They spoke to him, and he looked at them without recognizing them, saying things they did not understand. Ursula untied his wrists and ankles, lacerated by the pressure of the rope, and left him tied only by the waist. Later on, they built him a shelter of palm branches to protect him from the sun and the rain. Aureliano Buendia and Remedios Moscote were married one Sunday in March before the altar Father Nicanor Reina had set up in the parlour. It was the culmination of 4 weeks of shocks in the Moscote household, because little Remedios had reached puberty before getting over the habits of childhood. In spite of the fact that her mother had taught her about the changes of adolescence, one February afternoon she burst shouting into the living room, where her sisters were chatting with Aureliano, and showed them her panties, smeared with a chocolate-coloured paste. A month before the wedding was agreed upon. There was barely enough time to teach her how to wash herself, get dressed by herself, and understand the fundamental business of a home. They made her urinate over hot bricks in order to cure her of her habit of wetting her bed. It took a good deal of work to convince her of the inviolability of the marital secret, for Remedios was so confused, and at the same time so amazed at the revelation, that she wanted to talk to everybody about the details of the wedding night. It was a fatiguing effort, but on the day set for the ceremony, the child was as adept in the ways of the world as any of her sisters. Don Apolinar Moscote escorted her by the arm down the street that was decorated with flowers and wreaths amidst the explosion of rockets and the music of several bands, and she waved with her hand and gave her thanks with a smile to those who wished her good luck from the windows. Aureliano, dressed in black, wearing the same patent leather boots with metal fasteners that he would have on a few years later as he faced the firing squad, had an intense paleness and a hard lump in his throat when he met the bride at the door of the house and led her to the altar. She behaved so naturally, with such discretion, that she did not lose her composure, not even when Aureliano dropped the ring as he tried to put it on her finger. In the midst of the murmurs and confusion of the guests, she kept her arm with the fingerless lace glove held up, and remained like that with her ring finger ready, until the bridegroom managed to stop the ring with his foot before it rolled to the door, and came back blushing to the altar. Her mother and sisters suffered so much from the fear that the child would do something wrong during the ceremony, that in the end they were the ones who committed the impertinence of picking her up to kiss her. From that day on, the sense of responsibility, the natural grace, the calm control that Remedios would have in the face of adverse circumstances was revealed. It was she who, on her own initiative, put aside the largest piece that she had cut from the wedding cake and took it on a plate with a fork to José Arcadio Buendia. Tied to the trunk of the chestnut tree, huddled on a wooden stool underneath the palm shelter, the enormous old man, discoloured by the sun and rain, made a vague smile of gratitude and ate the piece of cake with his fingers, mumbling an unintelligible psalm. The only unhappy person in that noisy celebration, which lasted until dawn on Monday, was Rebecca Buendia. It was her own frustrated party. By an arrangement of Ursula's, her marriage was to be celebrated on the same day, but that Friday Pietro Crespi received a letter with the news of his mother's imminent death. The wedding was postponed. Pietro Crespi left for the capital of the province an hour after receiving the letter, and on the road he missed his mother, who arrived punctually Saturday night, and at Aureliano's wedding sang the sad aria that she had prepared for the wedding of her son. Pietro Crespi returned on Sunday midnight to sweep up the ashes of the party, after having worn out 5 horses on the road in an attempt to be in time for his wedding. It was never discovered who wrote the letter. Tormented by Ursula, Amaranta wept with indignation and swore her innocence in front of the altar, which the carpenters had not finished dismantling. Father Nicanor Reina, whom Don Apolinar Moscote had brought from the swamp to officiate at the wedding, was an old man hardened by the ingratitude of his ministry. His skin was sad, with the bones almost exposed, and he had a pronounced round stomach and the expression of an old angel, which came more from simplicity than from goodness. He had planned to return to his parish after the wedding, but he was appalled at the hardness of the inhabitants of Macondo, who were prospering in the midst of scandal, subject to the natural law, without baptizing their children or sanctifying their festivals. Thinking that no land needed the seed of God so much, he decided to stay on for another week to Christianize both circumcised and gentle, legalize concubinage, and give the sacraments to the dying. But no one paid any attention to him. They would answer him that they had been many years without a priest, arranging the business of their souls directly with God, and that they had lost the evil of original sin. Tired of preaching in the open, Father Nicanor decided to undertake the building of a church, the largest in the world, with life-size saints and stained-glass windows on the sides, so that people would come from Rome to honour God in the centre of impiety. He went everywhere, begging alms with a copper dish. They gave him a large amount, but he wanted more, because the church had to have a bell that would raise the drowned up to the surface of the water. He pleaded so much that he lost his voice. His bones began to fill with sounds. One Saturday, not even having collected the price of the doors, he fell into a desperate confusion. He improvised an altar in the square, and on Sunday he went through the town with a small bell, as in the days of insomnia, calling people to an open-air mass. Many went out of curiosity, others from nostalgia, others so that God would not take the disdain for his intermediary as a personal insult. So that at 8 in the morning half the town was in the square, where Father Nicanor chanted the Gospels in a voice that had been lacerated by his pleading. At the end, when the congregation began to break up, he raised his arms, signalling for attention. "Just a moment," he said. "Now we shall witness an undeniable proof of the infinite power of God." The boy who had helped him with the Mass brought him a cup of thick and steaming chocolate, which he drank without pausing to breathe. Then he wiped his lips with a handkerchief that he drew from his sleeve, extended his arms, and closed his eyes. Thereupon Father Nicanor rose 6 inches above the level of the ground. It was a convincing measure. He went among the houses for several days, repeating the demonstration of levitation by means of chocolate, while the acolyte collected so much money in a bag that in less than a month he began the construction of the church. No one doubted the divine origin of the demonstration except José Arcadio Buendía, who, without changing expression, watched the troop of people who gathered around the chestnut tree one morning to witness the revelation once more. He merely stretched on his stool a little and shrugged his shoulders when Father Nicanor began to rise up from the ground along with the chair he was sitting on. "Hoc est simplicissimus," José Arcadio Buendía said. "Homo iste statum quotum materiae invenit." Father Nicanor raised his hands, and the 4 legs of the chair all landed on the ground at the same time. "Nego," he said, "factum hoc existentiam Dei probat sine dubio." Thus it was discovered that José Arcadio Buendía's devilish jargon was Latin. Father Nicanor took advantage of the circumstance of his being the only person who had been able to communicate with him to try to inject the faith into his twisted mind. Every afternoon he would sit by the chestnut tree, preaching in Latin. But José Arcadio Buendía insisted on rejecting rhetorical tricks and the transmutation of chocolate, and he demanded the daguerreotype of God as the only proof. Father Nicanor then brought him medals and pictures, and even a reproduction of the Veronica. But José Arcadio Buendía rejected them as artistic objects, without any scientific basis. He was so stubborn that Father Nicanor gave up his attempts at evangelization and continued visiting him out of humanitarian feelings. But then it was José Arcadio Buendía who took the lead and tried to break down the priest's faith with rationalist tricks. On a certain occasion, when Father Nicanor brought a checker set to the chestnut tree and invited him to a game, José Arcadio Buendía would not accept, because according to him he could never understand the sense of a contest in which the 2 adversaries have agreed upon the rules. Father Nicanor, who had never seen checkers played that way, could not play it again. Ever more startled at José Arcadio Buendia's lucidity, he asked him how it was possible that they had him tied to a tree. "Hoc est simplicissimus," he replied, "because I'm crazy." From then on, concerned about his own faith, the priest did not come back to visit him, and dedicated himself to hurrying along the building of the church. Rebecca felt her hopes being reborn. Her future was predicted on the completion of the work, for one Sunday when Father Nicanor was lunching at the house, and the whole family sitting at the table, spoke of the solemnity and splendour that religious ceremonies would acquire when the church was built, Amaranta said, "The luckiest one will be Rebecca." And since Rebecca did not understand what she meant, she explained it to her with an innocent smile. "You're going to be the one who will inaugurate the church with your wedding." Rebecca tried to forestall any comments. The way the construction was going, the church would not be built before another 10 years. Father Nicanor did not agree. The growing generosity of the faithful permitted him to make more optimistic calculations. To the mute indignation of Rebecca, who could not finish her lunch, Ursula celebrated Amaranta's idea and contributed a considerable sum for the work to move faster. Father Nicanor felt that with another contribution like that, the church would be ready within 3 years. From then on, Rebecca did not say another word to Amaranta, convinced that her initiative had not the innocence that she attempted to give it. "That was the least serious thing I could have done," Amaranta answered her during the violent argument they had that night. "In that way I won't have to kill you for 3 years." Rebecca accepted the challenge. When Pietro Crespi found out about the new postponement, he went through a crisis of disappointment. But Rebecca gave him a final proof of her loyalty. "We'll elope whenever you say," she told him. Pietro Crespi, however, was not a man of adventure. He lacked the impulsive character of his fiancée, and he considered respect for one's given word as a wealth that should not be squandered. Then Rebecca turned to more audacious methods. A mysterious wind blew out the lamps in the parlour, and Ursula surprised the lovers kissing in the dark. Pietro Crespi gave her some confused explanations about the poor quality of modern pitch lamps, and he even helped her install a more secure system of illumination for the room. But the fuel failed again, or the wicks became clogged, and Ursula found Rebecca sitting on her fiancé's lap. This time she would accept no explanation. She turned the responsibility of the bakery over to the Indian woman, and sat in a rocking chair to watch over the young people during the visits, ready to win out over manoeuvres that had already been old when she was a girl. "Poor Mamma," Rebecca would say with mock indignation, seeing Ursula yawn during the boredom of the visits. "When she dies, she'll go off to her reward in that rocking chair." After 3 months of supervised love, fatigued by the slow progress of the construction, which he went to inspect every day, Pietro Crespi decided to give Father Nicanor the money he needed to finish the church. Amaranta did not grow impatient. As she conversed with her girlfriends every afternoon when they came to embroider on the porch, she tried to think of new subterfuges. A mistaken calculation spoiled the one she considered the most effective, removing the mothballs that Rebecca had put in her wedding dress before she put it away in the bedroom dresser. She did it when 2 months were left for the completion of the church. But Rebecca was so impatient with the approach of the wedding that she wanted to get the dress ready earlier than Amaranta had foreseen. When she opened the dresser and unfolded first the papers and then the protective cloth, she found the fabric of the dress and the stitches of the veil and even the crown of orange blossoms perforated by moths. Although she was sure that she had put a handful of mothballs in the wrappings, the disaster seemed so natural that she did not dare blame Amaranta. There was less than a month until the wedding, but Amparo Moscote promised to sew a new dress within a week. Amaranta felt faint that rainy noontime, when Amparo came to the house wrapped in the froth of needlework for Rebecca to have the final fitting of the dress. She lost her voice, and a thread of cold sweat ran down the path of her spine. For long months she had trembled with fright, waiting for that hour, because if she had not been able to conceive the ultimate obstacle to Rebecca's wedding, she was sure that at the last moment, when all the resources of her imagination had failed, she would have the courage to poison her. That afternoon, while Rebecca was suffocating with heat inside the armour of thread that Amparo Moscote was putting about her body with thousands of pins and infinite patience, Amaranta made several mistakes in her crocheting and pricked her finger with the needle. But she decided with frightful coldness that the date would be the last Friday before the wedding, and the method would be a dose of laudanum in her coffee.